Before we start this episode with Eric Marcum, the general manager of WSM AM in Nashville, Tennessee, I want to sadly mention that we had recorded it prior to the legendary morning show host Bill Cody of WSM passing away. We've recorded an addendum after the episode with Eric. Eric shares several stories about Bill and what Bill meant to the community of Nashville, to the listeners of WSM, and to Eric and the entire WSM staff. So please hang on and listen after this episode for a special Bill Cody addendum with Eric Marcum.
The first time I got to crack a microphone and go on the air, that's when the weight and the gravity of this radio station hit. And it was a moment when Mike Terry, who is a legendary voice on a radio station, still a Saturday night Grand Ole Opry announcer and works for Sirius XM as well on the highway. He was on remote and the Marty dropped from where he was located. And we were transitioning out of a commercial break, going to weather. We had to have a few deliverables hit to get into our commercial break. And I just felt it. I was like, now's the time. And I cracked that microphone. I turned it on. It said, 6:50 a.m. WSM, the legend. I'm Eric Marcum, checking in with Mike Terry in just a few minutes. But right now we're going to the sky. It's Commander Chuck.
Oh, wow.
And right whenever I turned off that microphone, my hands were shaking. That's when it hit. I recognized and realized when I said those call letters that I was in.
Benztown President Dave Chachi Dennis loves radio and all of his radio friends.
Hey, Chachi.
Hey, everybody.
Because Chachi loves everybody.
My guest today is a radio executive and broadcaster whose career is a true example of earning it from the ground up. He began as a board operator and steadily worked his way through marketing, traffic, production, and programming, learning every corner of the business along the way. He would go on to serve as assistant program director, morning show producer, and eventually rise to become general manager and content director of one of the most iconic radio stations in the world. Along the way, he's also been a voice behind the microphone, contributing to and hosting Americana-focused programming while helping lead the evolution of a legendary brand into the digital era through streaming and expanded on-demand content. Today, he helps steward a station that has shaped American culture, helped launch country music into the mainstream, and stands as one of the most historic names in broadcasting, including guiding it through a centennial celebration. From honoring tradition to embracing innovation, his story is one of leadership, perseverance, and passion for radio. Please welcome the general manager and content director of WSM Radio in Nashville, Tennessee, Eric Marcum.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I need to bring you along everywhere I go. Any room I walk into, I'll just let you roll in first.
I would be happy to do that, man. We first met just a few months ago at CRS, and were introduced through our mutual and good friend, Mr. Tom English.
Yeah, Tom is a great friend. I mean, somebody I knew from my early beginnings here in Nashville. And like all CRS, great connections at bar lines of all places. You know, it's how it always works, right?
Such a great town, and obviously the epicenter for country music. But I really enjoy CRS. It's probably my favorite convention of the year to go to. Just a tremendous energy. I love how the artists come out and really support the radio and come together. And being in the middle of Nashville, and I would say arguably the most important country station on the planet, I'd like to start off, if you wouldn't mind, Eric. Tell me a bit about WSM. I know that as we were talking to Tom, there's been books written about the radio station. It just turned 100 years old, and it's obviously home to the Grand Ole Opry. It doesn't get any more famous than that, but I would love if we could just dive into WSM and just the heritage of that radio station.
So WSM is the foundation of what we dub in Nashville as Music City, USA. Music City in Nashville, just music in general, country music as the level it is consumed now wouldn't exist without WSM's contributions and its impact 100 years ago. 1925, let's go all the way back to the National Life and Accident Insurance Company. They were, of course, going door to door to sell insurance. And you get to a point where, you know, you have a son who is in the business who doesn't want to go door to door, that is forward thinking and saying, you can touch so many more people by this brand new technology called radio, and had no interest in working for the family going door to door. What he wanted to do was open his own radio station and find ways to entertain. He saw this brand new technology. And that's what he did. They allowed him just a little bit of grace to open up the radio station WSM, and it caught on from there. So in Nashville, built out in what would just be the west side, the first transmitter in Nashville, and it's on what would be called now D. Ford Bailey Avenue, which was one of the early Opry stars back in the day. But 1925, that's where it started, the original transmitter at 5,000 watts, and would broadcast inside the National Life building in downtown Nashville. About 3 or 4 weeks later, after they started doing just what you would do in just talk, they had a gap in programming on a Saturday night. And Uncle Jimmy Thompson, who was an old-time fiddle tune expert, was just downstairs. So they welcomed him up to fill some time, and he started doing these old-time fiddle tunes, and people loved it. There was just this appreciation for hearing that old-time fiddle music that Nashville hadn't been recognized for because it was known for Vanderbilt University medical studies. It was very highbrow. So putting that on display in the South, they realized there was a hunger for that. People kept coming back to the point where they were welcoming people into the National Life building inside Studio C, I believe it was called then, to listen to what they called the barn dance. And eventually the barn dance was dubbed the Grand Ole Opry from George D. Hay. It caught on from then. And then it grew to the point where in the early 30s, 1932, they put in an application to build the 50,000 watt tower at the transmitter location at I-65 and Concord Road that still stands there today and broadcasts our signal live 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
And it's a clear channel station, so Correct. It's just blasting across America. Yep. How far does that signal reach?
So the cool, clear nights, that AM radio will bounce all the way 32 states and parts of Canada. It's so much fun. I'm from Indiana originally. I can go home, visit my family, and be driving around just outside of Indianapolis on a cool night around Christmas and tune in and hear WSM crystal clear.
Amazing. And in WSM, is this right? It stands for We Shield Millions.
Correct. It was a insurance company, and that was how they originally dubbed WSM, is the acronym for We Shield Millions.
Now, the barn dance, obviously it's being broadcast, but listeners could actually come to the building and see that in person?
Correct. Yeah, they welcomed people in. I think they recognized that there was a hunger for people to come see this in person, and it was just an open, Studio C building that it was just a floor of a building.
Got to be one of the first radio promotions, if you will.
Right.
That's remarkable.
So they put speakers on the edge of the National Life building so that people could hear it out into the streets because, it's the late 20s, early 30s. Not everybody has a radio, but they wanted to hear what was happening in Nashville. They wanted to hear what was happening on WSM and the Grand Ole Opry. And they got to experience it. So it drew crowds to the point where they then moved to East Nashville inside a tabernacle for a bit. And then they moved to eventually the Belcourt Theater and then the War Memorial Auditorium. And the War Memorial Auditorium was just a little bit higher brow. So they eventually got kicked out and said, instead of War Memorial Auditorium, why don't y'all head down to Ryman Auditorium? That seems a little more your speed. And that's what happened. And it became the home of the Grand Ole Opry for 30 plus years between the 40s and the 70s, to the point where E.W. Bud Wendell, who is just a phenomenal wealth of knowledge, who is still living, nearly 100 years old, started as a regional salesperson after he got out of the military for the National Life Company, became the personal assistant to Jack DeWitt, who was the original architect and engineer to all things WSM. What he had that Jack didn't. Jack was always forward thinking about technology and engineering. If Jack could have lived another 100 years, I believe that WSM would have been what you would consider Apple or Amazon right now when it comes to the tech that he was involved with satellite technology and forward thinking weather technology and how to see that on a screen in television. But one thing that Jack didn't think to focus on so much is how to make the Grand Ole Opry in this like a business, run it like a business. And that's what Bud Wendell did, and eventually invested into what ended up becoming Opryland. and the Grand Ole Opry House, and really built a foundation for this to become its own thing as far as an experience.
It's beautiful. If you have not been, highly recommend it the next time you are in Nashville. I got to go a couple of years ago, and it truly, I mean, it is what is it, 6,000 seats, something like that? It's
4,400 is what it holds.
Yeah. Beautiful venue.
If you go backstage, there probably is another 600, all about the who you know, so you could probably fit a full 5 in there.
And you guys still broadcast to this day. It's got to be, if not the longest running show. I can't believe that there's many others that would run longer continuously than the Grand Ole Opry.
We do get to hold the moniker as the world's longest running radio show. And we have surpassed 5,000 shows. So 100 years of broadcasting every single Saturday night, with the exception of a handful of times over the years that, we would have had to have gone dark for rightfully so reasons that have happened in the world. But we've been able to take the Grand Ole Opry over the years in World War II to entertain the troops. WSM was used in wartime efforts. At the time, would have been classified information for submarines to talk back and forth to each other between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. So utilizing our tower's signal strength in wartime efforts is another tidbit.
That is remarkable. So the communications that the submarines were not broadcasting, but amongst themselves, were literally going through your tower site.
Yeah, using our transmitter facility.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
that's so fascinating.
The information that you can find, and I highly recommend the book by Craig Havinghurst. It's called Air Castle of the South, WSM, by Craig Havinghurst. Highly recommend that. It is a deep dive read.
We'll put a link, Eric, to the book in the show notes because it sounds, I know Tom had mentioned it as we were emailing back and forth. It sounds like just a truly fascinating book, and just what remarkable history to go back 101 years. And literally, it's in so many ways 3 different businesses. It started as an insurance business, and then it transforms into a radio station, and then into, arguably the most successful, longest running radio show of all time and live event. That is hallowed ground. I mean, I would say the Ryman and the Grand Ole Opry are the 2 most famous places or legendary places that you can perform, certainly as a country artist, and I'd argue for just about any artist, maybe.
Absolutely. And what's great about the company I work for, it's Ryman Hospitality Properties Incorporated. It's a real estate investment trust, and it's changed to that within the last 15 years. It used to be Gaylord Entertainment, is that it's recognized ways to not only make history, but preserve history. So in the 90s, there was an effort for the Ryman Auditorium to be turned into a parking lot because there was a demand for it. And it was noticed by the artists, and it was noticed by the music community that it was something that had to be saved. And our company was forethinking to come in and buy the building, renovate it, and turn it into the mother church of country music. Without our company forward thinking in that and investing into those moments, we wouldn't have some of the history making moments and venues and storytelling products and brands that we currently have.
Some of the artists that credit the Grand Ole Opry and WSM for helping launch and support their career throughout the years, it's a who's who, but Johnny Cash, Patsy Cline, Dolly Parton, Willie Nelson. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But it is so remarkable the impact that you've had on so many country artists, and obviously millions and millions of listeners who tune in on a weekly basis to listen to the show.
And for WSM, one thing that we get to do that not a lot of other radio stations have the opportunity to do is to make this an open door, almost like a Thanksgiving table for artists, both who are legacy talent, up and coming artists. It's an opportunity for people to connect with each other in a country music community. The songwriters come together and share stories and memories on our radio station. So we operate relatively independent versus how some other corporate radio stations operate. You have maybe 1 or 2 program directors operating a cluster of locations. We have a small staff of radio people here in the division of WSM, but we always make it an open door for artists to come in and share their stories. Carly Pierce, John Party, just 2 that I can think offhand, Lainey Wilson being another one of today's artists who make an impact in country music. Their first interviews would have happened on WSM Radio. Bill Cody, who is our morning man and has been the cornerstone of WSM for 30 plus years, has made it a point to always recognize people who are passionate about country music and recognize talent, being an open door to those artists early to the point where they come back. They realize that the first little crack to kick open the door for their career would have been WSM, and making the connections to the administrative team and the programming team of WSM and the Grand Ole Opry. And I like to think that it's the sort of the building blocks of getting to that cornerstone.
We started this conversation speaking about CRS, and I think the community that country radio and country artists have together, it really is this remarkable collaboration. And I wish we would see that in other formats, but country just shines. And you go to an event like that and you feel it, and you can tell that the artists really care about radio and they really care about their listeners. And I'm not saying that other formats do not, but there is a difference that I feel when you go to an event like that and you see the artists coming out and really having a gratitude and appreciation for radio and what they've done for their careers. And I think vice versa. And the radio stations will support them, later on in their careers. And sometimes, other formats are so concerned about a song being a hit, or it's got to test well, or they won't go early on a song until it's proved itself on now TikTok or YouTube or whatever it might be. And I really respect that as a format, you go out on a limb for each other, which I think's really neat.
The artists consider WSM also as their home. I know Vince Gill, who is just such a major part of what we do. You would consider him a broadcaster. He gets to be up on that stage, center stage, recognizing and knowing not only am I entertaining the people right in front of me, but I'm also reaching out into the radio and sharing a story or sharing a memory with somebody who's listening around the world.
Have you, over the years, and how long have you been now at WSM? And we're going to learn, by the way, a little bit more about Eric. And this interview started a little bit differently because WSM is such a legendary radio station. I wanted to start with Eric really telling us about it. And so here's a bit of a segue. But what is one of the craziest calls you've ever taken? And crazy is probably not the right word, but you were just in shock when someone called you up. Have you had one of those moments where a country artist, just like a Garth Brooks out of the blue, calls you up?
Garth is a perfect example. Yeah, we were, the one moment that I recognize immediately is that we were the first to announce that Loretta Lynn had passed away. And we got notification from her family. And coincidentally, Garth and Trisha would have been listening to WSM and picked up the phone and called us.
Wow.
They immediately went right to air and they shared stories and memories. Once that happened, we were able to do some outreach to some other Opry members and slowly had a full celebration of life of Loretta Lynn just moments after she had passed.
And it's got to be so cathartic for certainly the Nashville community, but for the artists as well and your listeners. That's truly is a family. Let's get into you and learn more just about Eric and how you got into this business. But let's start about growing up. Where did you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up in Indiana, Newcastle, Indiana, just about 40 miles east of Indianapolis, very close to Ball State University, who had a great program in telecommunications. So listening to that college radio station and listening to WMDH locally really gave me the bug for radio. I can remember specifically sitting at home on a Friday night and calling into the radio station on a request night. And, they were banking calls. I know how the magic works now. But you'd call in, they'd answer it, they'd bank a few calls, and you'd wonder if you were going to get on the radio. You didn't know. You're like, oh, man, he just kind of hung up on me. I don't know if it's going to happen. And then you hear your voice. And the moment that you hear your voice on the radio for the very first time as a 9-year-old boy, it's gotcha. It's gotcha. So I heard that and I I requested Alabama, and it stuck with me. That moment stuck with me forever. And I knew every time I listened to WMDH that one day I would work there. And eventually I did. I would listen to WMDH whenever I was sitting out by the lake with my grandfather when we were fishing. We had a little radio that we would listen to, and it would be country music on WMDH. When I was 16, I started working for my high school radio station, WKPW. Mike York was my program director and taught me everything I know about the do's, the don'ts, spent a lot of time in production. Learned that that was my passion, was really production. And eventually, after I was a couple years into getting my education of radio, applied for a summer job at WMDH and got it. And it was going into my senior year. So I spent a full year on the radio station at WMDH and got to announce out of my senior year, as I was getting ready to leave that entire area and move on to college, that I would be my commencement speaker. I would be the commencement speaker at Newcastle High School's graduation. To be able to do that at that age on the one radio station that makes an impact of a town of about 15 to 20,000 people, that'll make you proud.
Yeah, let's dive into that for a moment. You're a young guy. I'm looking at this right now, class of 2006. So I'm doing the math. You're late 30s. To be interested in radio, you're 10, 11 years old, or younger than I am. I love that you're into radio, and you requested Alabama. So you were an old soul. Was that something that your parents, did you grow up around more classic country music as a kid?
A mixed bag. I mean, it would be Alabama on the radio, Shenandoah. I specifically remember being with my grandmother and having an imprint of Ricky Skaggs. And it was a bluegrass album that he had. And coincidentally, WSM was the microphone in front of him on the album cover. Yeah, you want to talk about planting a seed.
That is incredibly cool. Were your parents supportive of you pursuing a career in broadcasting?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Do they have an entertainment background or a music background?
My mom was a transcriptionist and now does medical records for a hospital. My dad was a drummer in a local band in Newcastle, Indiana. And he, worked in the hospital as a telemetry technician. So he would basically watch heart monitors, and struck up a friendship with the doctors in the building. And they called themselves Time Travel because they would go back and play like 60s, 70s, 80s sort of classic rock. And they would mix in a few like Black Crowes and, a little bit of Nickelback in there. It was pretty fun to listen to in those days. But they would come together as a band, and they would always call them the Doctors because they were, two of them were doctors. One was a truck driver and one was a telemetry technician. But they enjoyed it on a local scale, enjoying what they do and knowing that that was their nighttime job, and their day jobs, they'd be back in the hospital.
It was evident you get a lot of creativity from your father. And did you ever pick up any instruments yourself?
It was just whenever he had them there, I would play the drums, and I did a little bit of percussion in high school, but found myself on the stage in theatrics and, didn't continue. I wish I did. I wish I did continue band because I think I would have really enjoyed drumline. But no, not musically inclined these days. I'm just kind of behind the paper.
You are in Music City, so it's never too late to pick up some drumsticks or a guitar pick. Certainly a lot of phenomenal artists that I'm sure you could learn from.
It's the funniest thing in Nashville because it's guaranteed whether you come into Nashville and think that you're the best singer or the best guitar player or the best drummer. And the ongoing joke is the person that just sold you your beer or brought you your food is better than you. My grandfather, who I lost when I was really young, came down to Nashville and did some drumming work with a few session players here and there, but found that Newcastle was home. So he went back. I've been trying to find some records or whatever maybe he would have been on at the time to be on the drums.
I'm sure he was incredibly talented. To be able to hang in that era was not easy, especially as a studio musician. That's impressive. So you get chosen as the commencement speaker. What was the criteria for that?
Well, originally it is your salutatory and invaledictory and get the first right of refusal. Okay. That was not me. Okay. I was about middle of the pack.
Okay.
I did participate on my speech team and participated in the radio side of speech. So I went out there and gave it my all, and they picked me. That's
amazing. It's also important to note that in 2006, the year that you graduated, you were part of the Indiana Association of School Broadcasters, and you won multiple awards. You got first place for imaging, first place for spot production, third place for on air, and third place for sports report. And then overall, the school placed number one as the number one radio station. So you were really talented and well-rounded to be able to do production, to be on air. And now you're in management as a general manager. So you really understand just all aspects of the business.
One thing that I think was the fire to understand that management was a future. I discovered this recently. My first year at working at the high school radio station, I didn't realize that at the end of the year there was an award ceremony for the IASB. Uh-huh. So I'm sitting there after the first year and I see all these people who have given it their all and worked in spot production and turned in air checks and then got an award for something. And I recognized then that was a key performance indicator. That was a KPI right there. That gave me the fire for the next year to know what my benchmark was. I went in the studio and I was cutting spots, putting my head to the pen to paper on creative writing. I recognized that there was something to achieve. And I achieved it.
You truly have. You truly have. Were you a competitive as a kid?
Yeah. Sports, all sports, baseball, basketball for a little while. I wasn't tall enough for my hometown basketball team. If you've ever seen the movie Hoosiers.
Yeah, of course.
Indiana is the bread and butter is basketball. Yeah. And people live it. They breathe it. I got to enjoy watching high school basketball. I mentioned that our hometown is 15 to 20,000. Well, our high school field house seats 10,000. So it was one of those towns that on a Friday night when you know you've got a basketball game, those local businesses flip that closed sign around that says, I'm off to the basketball game.
Half the population goes to the game.
Yep.
My girlfriend is from Fort Wayne, Indiana. I'll actually be there in a couple weeks for her nephew's graduation, but a beautiful state and certainly a lot of great broadcasters, including yourself. Bob and Tom have come out of Indiana.
And that was another thing. We got to do tours of radio stations. A couple times a year, we got to go to the Bob and Tom studios and watch them in the morning. And Tom Griswold, just such a genius. And we just lost Bob. He is just such a core broadcaster of not just Indiana, but the world. I mean, what they've done over the years, it's put an imprint on me, certainly. For sure.
Great. David Letterman from Indiana. Jeff Simoleon is in Indiana with the MS is based there. So great broadcasting state for sure. So you get accepted to Purdue. I mean, that's a big deal. And you go into theater sound design and technology. So at this point, are you still pursuing broadcasting or are you thinking about maybe taking a different lane?
Yeah, different lane. I was heading to the recording studio. Originally, I went into Purdue University thinking I would be either an engineer or an air traffic controller. Going back to me not being the valedictorian or salutatorian, I was weeded out pretty quick in those math classes. Engineering was not my bag. I'm more of a creative. So I jumped over to the theater side for sound design and technology.
I'm watching a documentary right now on FDR, and there was a Supreme Court justice, I can't remember the name, that was, he was kind of a frenemy, if you will, of FDR, but he said that FDR had a second-rate intellect, but a first-rate temperament. And that's what made him so successful. Yep. And I'm like, you know what? I'll take that. I'll take the first-rate temperament.
It's true, yeah. But yeah, Purdue University, it was my first time being in a really professional studio. High school radio, you get to get in the weeds of it. We had our first digital audio workstation. I was the first grade, or the first school year, I should say, into the digital age. Prior to that, everybody was still cutting tape with grease pencils and taping them back together. So going into a recording studio with a fully functional, ready-to-go multi-track was like a kid in candy store for me.
I'm sure.
So I really enjoyed that side of it for a little bit. And then being in the theater side of it, did live production. A lot of live sound installation, a lot of CAD drawings of putting together how the speakered system would be installed and work together for multi-point surround sound. So a lot of tech. But I recognized after I graduated from Purdue and went on the road for a little while for a traveling production company that I'm a homebody. And nothing better than radio to keep you at home.
So at one point you were thinking about traveling the world or traveling the country at least and working on productions. And by the way, really quickly, I think you're the only person I've ever interviewed in upper management that has such a well-rounded background. I've certainly spoken to some that have been programmers or on the air, but to have an engineering background and to know that aspect of the business and the acoustic side of it is, I don't think I've ever spoken to anyone like that. It's very impressive.
Yeah, thank you. It's I've recognized that I'm certainly not the smartest person in the room when it comes to these things, but I can speak intelligently about them. And I allow those who do know it well the proper guidance. Like I can visualize what needs to happen and understand, let's just say, part of the beaten path of how to get there. But for those who are really in the weeds and know how to do it, like our chief engineer, Jason Cooper, he can just pave the highway and go. And I can kind of explain how I want to get there. That's what's been super helpful.
And your gig now, it probably doesn't get any more perfect, because here's this legendary radio station that you get to program and manage and certainly in the mix of it all. Plus, you guys have a live show that's happening, and so you get to draw back to the days of when you were doing stage production. It's wild, at least kind of be part of it all. I'm sure that's in a lot of ways has to be a dream come true.
It's fun because you're right. I get to do all those things in one central location when typically you would have to take those shows out and travel.
Yeah.
I recognized pretty quickly I was about 6 weeks away from getting married in 2010. And they gave me a one-way ticket to California to go work on this USA Swimming production. And I get there, having a good time. Those first 2 weeks fly by into week 3, and I'm up against the gun looking at my calendar going, I'm married in 2 weeks and I still don't have a ticket back. I don't know when I'm getting home. And my wife is wondering if I'm going to make the wedding, and there's that question of whether or not, knowing when you're going to be home. You don't always know when you're traveling. And I got home a week before the wedding and realized that traveling live production makes me tired and I like to be home.
I believe it. I think a lot of people, including myself, look at that lifestyle as being really exciting and being on the road in these tour buses and getting to travel the world. But I know it's got to be just exhausting to be away from. I've never gotten to experience it, but I have to imagine it's got to be exhausting to be away from your family, to constantly be living out of hotels and eating from vending machines and not having the comforts that so many of us want to have at home with your family and your children and so forth.
Now it's a different tiredness that wakes you up at 3 o'clock in the morning to do morning radio for many, many years. So at least you're sleeping in your own bed at night. That's one part about it. You never really get rest being a radio person or somebody in the entertainment business.
So let's jump into, I want to just talk a little bit. We talked about obviously the high school radio station, and there you were helped with the morning show and you did production and won all those awards. And then you went on to Purdue. At that time in 2010, when you came back and you got married, how does the WSM opportunity present itself, and how do you get yourself in the front door?
So it was the moment that my wife and I both graduated college, and we were ready to throw a dart in the map and say, where does life take us? And I had reached out to quite a few different cities, one being Austin. Of course, we were looking at California, Atlanta, Jacksonville, and certainly Chicago. I really had my map set to Chicago. But Nashville kept calling. And I reached out to the program director at the time, Joe Lamarty, and coincidentally, the flood of 2010 had just happened in Nashville, and the radio station was displaced from the Opryland Hotel. And the first time in the radio station's history, it was broadcasting from the transmitter building at I-65 and Concord Road, literally in Jack DeWitt's former office that he built out in 1932. That was where the control room was located. There was very, very little central heat and air. So our program director, in the middle of still May, it's, relatively cool, is heating himself through the kitchen oven, turning it on and getting warm through there. That's how bare bones it was there.
Unbelievable.
There was no production room. So when I reached out and said, hey, here's my credentials, I've been on the air at this point for 4 or 5 years of radio experience in studio production work. Here are my accolades. And he said, we need help. I need some people to come to Nashville or be in Nashville, go out and record these syndicated radio shows that we have, do the spot production that we have, record commercials, just out in the field, be able to edit these pieces of audio, send them back to us for air. And I was fully capable. That was my foot in the door part-time. While doing that, also extending over into the live aspect of filling in on the morning show. If they were out at an event, I would be back board opping from the transmitter building at I-65 and Concord Road. So both in studio and out in the field production.
So here you're able to you're really a Swiss Army knife in so many ways, and it's this perfect opening, and you've got this passion for the business and willing to roll up your sleeves and get into the trenches. When you get hired, and here you get hired at this legendary radio station that we just talked so much about. What was that feeling like? Was it a bit surreal?
At first it took a minute to understand the gravity of it. To me, it was, I got a gig at a radio station. Yes, I can do whatever you want me to do. You want me to go out on a remote and set up the console and connect the Marty at the time and get us back to the studio? I can do it. It was less about the legacy of the radio station and more about what needed to be done to prove myself. Then the first time I got to crack a microphone and go on the air, that's when the weight and the gravity of this radio station hit. And it was a moment when Mike Terry, who is a legendary voice on a radio station, still a Saturday night Grand Ole Opry announcer and works for Sirius XM as well on the highway. He was on remote and the Marty dropped from where he was located. And we were transitioning out of a commercial break, going to weather. We had to have a few deliverables hit to get into our commercial break. And I just felt it. I was like, now's the time. And I cracked that microphone. I turned it on. It said, 6:50 a.m. WSM, the legend. I'm Eric Marcum, checking in with Mike Terry in just a few minutes. But right now we're going to the sky. It's Commander Chuck.
Oh, wow.
And right whenever I turned off that microphone, my hands were shaking. That's when it hit. I recognized and realized when I said those call letters that I was in.
Oh, I love that. And it was, you cracked the mic, not expecting to crack the mic. It just happened. Correct. Because that is so cool. Do you happen to have that air check by any chance?
I don't. I'm going to go look at now. I think I've just brought that memory to the forefront of my brain, not realizing that it was there. I need to go find that.
It gives me goosebumps just hearing you tell that story. So how long do you guys broadcast from the transmitter site?
It was almost a full year.
And then did you guys go back to the Opryland Hotel at that point, or what was the plan?
So we did go back into the hotel. It wasn't a full engineering installation at the time. So we treated it like a remote. So we had a 4-channel mixer, a couple mics connected via fiber back to the tower. And I would be back there running the board at the transmitter building for about the next 4 months while engineering reloaded in all the automation equipment and everything that would allow that, the new digital console, because we went from an analog console to a digital console all in that same time. It was just the right time to do it, to go into the digital age. So in order to get all that equipment and forward think everything and install it, we had to operate like a remote for 4 months.
I couldn't even imagine having to do that. And I'm sure it was incredibly stressful, but now that you look back at it, imagine it was just wild, but also fun times that you probably cherished.
Yeah, I do. It's you get in the trenches with your team, and that's where you start to gain respect for each other. You recognize their capabilities, their strengths, the opportunities for you to provide in the areas that they aren't as strong, and you really develop a team effort. You really are your own army, and that's where I started to just stick around. That was the moment that was like, Eric is here. He's not going anywhere. I was still part-time at that time, but working full-time hours. So at that point, they folded me up into see a need, fill a need, and I became the marketing and promotions assistant, as well as the assistant to the assistant production director.
Eric, I think there's seriously nothing that you have not done at a radio station. It's amazing.
I'd be folding up T-shirts, popping up tents, setting up tables, pulling out the broadcasting gears, then setting up the microphones and setting up the little Mackie mixer and connecting us back to the station and throwing T-shirts from the stage, all that needed to be done. And then the opportunity came up where they said, all right, we need a traffic and continuity coordinator. So I said, my hand's up. I'm not going anywhere. You tell me what needs to be done.
Did you know what that even, not to, but
no,
you know,
no, I didn't.
Yeah, coming from a high school station, I doubt you had, one there. So they throw you into that. Who taught you?
It was the former marketing person, Nicole Judd, who had done it for many years. But in this period of losing the traffic and continuity person, she was kind of filling the gaps and saying, okay, I can train you, but I don't want to do this forever. And I said, cool, I'll take it on. So I continued to do traffic for many, many years, to the point where, and we're a small station, so we don't have a ton of in and out production. I would say we produce maybe in the ballpark of 5 in a week to 15 on a heavy week spots that need to be put in the system and then trafficked. So not a whole lot, but we've got it down to an efficiency to where we just open up our log and have the rules set up to immediately lock it. I got to build and architect going from an old traffic system to a new traffic system. And it's great to hand that off to somebody knowing that every single T is crossed and every I is dotted, that I've worked in that system. I've worked in marketing and promotions and know what's successful. I know how to imprint on somebody who sees you at an event and have them educate that listener on the surface level of what WSM is, the radio home of the Grand Ole Opry. You can listen to every live Opry show and every day part for free via your phone or if you're local at 650 AM WSM. So from a marketing and promotion standpoint to the traffic and continuity standpoint to needing to go in and cut a spot or assign a VO to a particular talent and go in and cut that spot, make sure now it gets into the system. I can assign a cart number. I can assign anything and everything that needs to be set up to traffic it properly. So now I step back and I realize that I know the ins and outs of the entire operation.
You truly do. I think you might be the most well-rounded person in radio. It's truly impressive. After doing traffic and continuity, what was your next step on the WSM ladder?
After doing traffic and continuity, my next step was to get on the air permanently. While I loved being in the office on the administrative side in the recording studio, my beacon was set to point to getting on the stage, to following in the footsteps of my program director at the time, Joe Lamarty. And by the way, going back to how traffic and continuity and marketing and promotions came as an opportunity, that was Tom English recognizing that I was that guy who wouldn't go away, but was talented enough to do anything and everything he needed to be done. And Tom English was the one that hired me full time.
And was Tom the GM at this point?
Tom is the GM.
Tom is, I'm sure most people know, but if you don't, incredible human being, inside radio, obviously made the introduction to us a few months ago at CRS, but what a great broadcaster. So Tom believed in you, and did he take you in under his wing in a lot of ways?
He did, absolutely. I learned a lot about business from Tom, just observing and watching how, one, he carried himself into a room. That's a major part of it. A first impression means a lot, and I learned that from Tom. And next from Tom was that you are your own CEO. You are in control of anything that you want to do. If you set your mind to it, you can do it. And the only thing you need is to believe in yourself and have the motivation. I learned that from Tom.
It's tremendous advice. I completely agree with that. So did you get your opportunity to go on air?
I did. Yeah. So it was about 2016. So I'm, 6 years into the radio station, 4 years in production at that point. And an opportunity came up where I went to the new program director and the new general manager, post Tom, and said, listen, we're missing a major part of Nashville's heart and soul. And that is the songwriting community and what is active in the world of the Americana Music Association. There are so many incredible songwriters. You want to talk about your favorite artist out there? Their favorite songwriter is in the Americana world, guaranteed. And if you want to talk about the folk music and the bluegrass music and the roots music that's making an impact to the heart and soul, we're missing it. And he was like, great, put together a business plan of what a programming schedule looks like for an Americana show, bring it to me. And I included utilizing artists or had targeted a specific person to be a host for this. And Chris Kulik, who was our general manager at the time, looked at me and said, why don't you just do it? That was the green light for me to become a personality on the radio. So I got to build out my programming schedule, reach out to local artists. So for 4 years, I hosted Route 650, our Americana show on WSM that would eventually grow into a full-fledged 24-hour, 7 days a week sub-channel that's available on our digital platform. So on our mobile device and our website, you can stream it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, Americana streaming station.
That had to be incredibly gratifying to come up with a concept like that and see it through and see it come to fruition. Was it running on, when it first started, was it just a weekly show or a daily show?
Daily show, 1 hour, and it was that transition period weekdays between a talk show that we had and then the start of the Grand Ole Opry. So instead of going from like just such a cold stop from a talk show into the Opry, they wanted to have some sort of olive branch.
Oh, that's great.
And that's what I did. I got to highlight the singers and songwriters who are making their debut. So we would take the broadcast table, and I would broadcast from backstage at the Grand Ole Opry House in the family room once a week on Tuesdays, especially because those were some of our bigger nights. So we would reach out to artists from their dressing room. I mean, I would be staring at Steve Wariner while he's sitting in Roy Acuff's former dressing room and say, "Hey, Steve, you want to come over for a chat?" And he'd come on over and we would talk. You know, I got to talk with Tommy Emmanuel about Chet Atkins, you know, giving him the honor of becoming a certified guitar player. Trisha Yearwood came over and did an interview with me, and coincidentally, they were recording an episode of Trisha's Southern Kitchen at the time. So my mom's sitting back at home a few months later, and she sees me on television on Trisha's Southern Kitchen on TV, and it all was born out of this small 1 hour radio show idea that was conceptualized from the fact that we weren't highlighting enough localized Americana singer-songwriters. Then it just grew from there. There was an opportunity where Circle Television Network was being launched here as a joint venture with Gray Television. And they wanted to put Bill Cody's morning show on TV. And the director of production, Martin Fisher, who is our VP here, reached out to me and said, "Hey, you have a working relationship with Bill. You recognize the technical side, the ins and outs. I have a director of TV coming on board. I want you to produce this show." So then I went from what you would consider, this is all still under the umbrella of Opry Entertainment Group, and WSM as a division of it. I rolled up into Martin Fisher's division of production and worked on the morning show for 3.5 to 4 years, every day delivering a live TV product.
What was that like? A, working with Bill Cody every day, obviously a legendary talent, but then B, doing a television show. Here is yet another feather in your cap of just how well-rounded you are. Obviously some similarities, but there's definitely some differences as well between television and radio.
Yeah, a lot of it was being sort of a cathartic voice and or filter in the room to allow radio show to live on TV. Because you have somebody like Bill Cody who has done what he's done in the WSM studio for 30 years in the same chair and is, 50 plus years in radio. And you're going in there trying to make his show a TV show. And you have ideas from a TV director who has a vision for how to make it look great. But maybe, comes at the detriment of how a radio producer would want it to be tight and fast and move. So it was the balance of being sort of a psychiatrist between the two, not really allowing either one to come into the fold together, but you have to make it work for one and the other for it to be successful. If it only works for TV, it doesn't work for radio. If it only works for radio, it doesn't work for TV. So you have to find that balance of the ins and outs. And I think that is the moment that working with Bill Cody gained me a level up that a lot of people who step either into a program director role or a general manager role of leadership with a pedigree of heritage talent have a difficult time to help lead, is that I quickly gained the trust of somebody like Bill Cody. And I appreciate him so much for giving the ringing endorsement, if you will, for me to be able to put Bill Cody on my resume to apply for the general manager role and knowing that he would have my back.
For sure. And going from producing the television show and the radio show as well, you now are getting your management chops in a lot of ways. Again, just another part of how well-rounded you are. Was that an easy segue for you, or was that somewhat challenging? Because that's a big, especially at your age. You're, I'm guessing, what, about 30 at this time?
I was 35, moving from producer to general manager. Now, one little extra detail is that whenever I was in college, I did get, a few accounting and a few finance classes under my belt, to the point where, to make ends meet while I was working part-time here with a radio station, I was working full-time as a mortgage consultant.
Oh my God. I am very impressed by your work ethic. I know that. So you are doing that. You're literally 2 full-time jobs in a lot of ways.
Yep. And it's a balance of sales and understanding how finances work.
So you step in, do they interview, I'm assuming people that, it's a very coveted position. I'm assuming they interviewed quite a few people that were interested in this gig. And when you came in, you were being interviewed for it. Did you feel like you had a chance? Or, I mean, obviously you had Bill Cody's backing, which is incredibly impressive, but I could see as, be interviewing you, I'd be like, man, 35, first time being a general manager of a radio station. And we're not talking just any radio station. We're talking WSM in Nashville, a legendary station. So there's a lot on the line. What was that process like? What did they ask you in that interview?
Oh, I mean, there's a lot to it. The main core of it was, of course, I can trust. I have a finance team. I have an accounting team. I have a CapEx team. I have a chief marketing officer, chief operating officer. I have a lot of upper level management support. They can provide me a roadmap on how to operate this as a business, and they do help me. One thing that they needed to do was understand that the person that comes into this role can quickly, passionately find trust in the team so that the team can trust this role is in good hands. So that I can walk into a room and that Bill Cody trusts that I have his best interests at heart. And that I sit down with Kelly Sutton, who is, if you follow her career, is currently on American Idol as a mentor and is on Amazon Country Heat Weekly podcast alongside Amber Anderson, who we now employ as well, is that when I walk into a room and I have a vision, that they trust me and that they know that whenever they have an idea for programming, that I trust them. And it's us sitting down and collaborating together to steer the ship in the right way. If I hadn't mentioned already, our team is also the host of the Grand Ole Opry. So not only are we radio people, we're on-stage hosts for every show, 235 shows last year.
Wow.
So whenever that curtain goes up, the first face and the first voice that you hear is a WSM employee.
Walk me through. I did not know that. Well, first 235 shows, so that's a third of the year, or 2/3 of the year. Sorry, 2/3 of the year, you guys are doing a show. So the stage is on more than it is off. That's unbelievable. That's got to be one of the most active venues in the world to be doing, shows. That's more events that are going through like crypto here in Los Angeles. That's amazing.
You want to talk about a tight schedule. You're talking Mike Terry, who I've mentioned before, Kelly Sutton, Charlie Matos, who is our morning show producer, and Bill Cody. Those are your 4 Opry announcers. Every one of them are in the studio weekdays at 6:00 to either get ready for their live show, to pre-record whatever they need to. So they're split shifting their day. One of those 4 are going to be on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry for that curtain up at 7:00 and the curtain down just after 9:00 to then come back that next morning and be in the studio at 6.
Impressive work ethic. Walk me through a day, just a typical day for you at WSM. And let's go through a day. Well, like we said, there's more shows happening than not happening at the Grand Ole Opry, but let's go through a day that there is a show happening, and they're all big shows, but a show you've got to go to. So walk me through that day, what that looks like.
A great example is what we just did a few weeks ago is WSM night at the Grand Ole Opry, where, I wake up in the morning, I get my morning run in. Every time I've got my earbuds in, and either if I'm not listening to an air check, I'm listening to a most recent podcasted episode of our morning show, or I'm tuning into the show live. So I'm always thinking creatively of how our team is putting out content, live, recorded, produced. So it helps me cathartically go into a creative mode while I run. It takes my mind off the pain. Right.
Are you running on a treadmill? Are you running outdoors?
Outdoors. I typically hit a trail. We're lucky enough to be right next to a bridge that takes us into East Nashville's Shelby Park that just goes for miles and miles. I can run all the way downtown from Opryland.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So it's lucky enough to have that. But yeah, I'm sitting there thinking, what can we either do better? What opportunities are we missing? What do we need to be forward thinking when we have access to these artists? How are we thinking about the future of DSPs? What capital projects am I working for next year? I've got a FEMA modernization project working on. So I'm taking all these puzzle pieces for a day and I'm collecting what is my priority for the day. Sometimes that priority for the day is simply having a conversation that's going to have an impact with a team member. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it is I'm block scheduled for 30 minutes back to back to back the entire day. That's a typical start of a day. And then I reorganize my thoughts and I come in here and then I have to put them on paper. If I don't make that checklist, it's not going to happen. The checklist is probably the most important next step. I think anybody who has a block scheduled day understands the checklist. And then do what I can to hit the email and hit the higher priorities. Next step is to go visit with the team. Check in with everybody. We have a team of 10 full-timers, and then a few outside contractors, like our chief engineer is a vendor of ours. And I make sure if I don't check in with them once a week to at least, make sure that they're doing okay. And that's one of the most important things I think of this role is that every team member feels like they have an opportunity or an open door to check in with their leader. And that's one of the things. If I can feel that somebody is off, one of the most important things to do is pause the checklist and say, are you okay? Is everything good? What can I do to help? If it's anything that I have from that Swiss Army knife of opportunities or problems or things that I've pretzeled before that I've found a solution for, it's easy. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's psychological. So I help the team move the ball on various things. But then I always, head over to the studio at least once a day and check in with the functions, because our studio is also an exhibit. It's part of the Opry Backstage Tour. So if you buy a ticket to the tour and you go backstage and you go through the circle room access, and the last stop is your tour guide saying, and I know that I've mentioned it throughout the tour, that this is the longest running radio show, and you get access to that studio. If you just walk across the plaza, we are inside Roy Acuff's former home. The Roy Acuff House is what we dub it. And we turned our studio into the new home of WSM about 2 years ago. But we also turned the front door into an exhibit space. They can walk in the front door, see a live broadcast happening, and we have a full feature with artifacts on display, including a history timeline wall and a full feature on like a 6-minute video of a walkthrough of the tower, since that is not something that we can open to the public. So it's a behind the curtains view of how a radio station operates and the history of the station.
That is so cool. And I don't know if there's another station in the country that does anything like that. To have such a magnitude of importance certainly to the format and to artists, but to the listeners, where they come from all over the world to go on that tour and visit and see the radio station. It actually harkens back to the very beginning with the barn dance, when people could actually come to the radio station and listen to, out on the street with the speakers and go up there and watch or listen to fiddle music. I mean, that's really cool that 100 years later you can still do that.
And for 40 years, our radio station lived inside the Opryland Hotel. And when people would come out to the Opryland theme park, or people would come to the Grand Ole Opry for a show in the mid-1970s, when the hotel and the Opry House was built, those were country music fans. There was people who were coming here to experience a country music moment. Over the years, that's changed. The Opryland Hotel has grown to a point where it's mostly a convention space. The people who are going to visit that hotel aren't there to go to a Grand Ole Opry show or experience country music. They're there for business. So over time and evolution, our radio station sort of became this little island of sort of unbranded experience. So people would be walking by the radio station, heading to a convention, and going, why do they have a little podcast studio in this hotel? I don't really understand why this is here. And over time, we were like, neither do we. It's time to move on. And coincidentally, the Opryland Hotel went through a multi-million-dollar expansion, which broke ground in 2024. And they approached us and said, all right, either you have to leave for a full year during this construction project for safety, and we can rebuild a studio space, or you need to find a new home temporarily. And that's when we came back to the drawing board to say, what buildings do we have? What assets do we have? There was an idea of us possibly moving into Ryman Auditorium. There was a conversation about possibly turning the radio station over to the Country Music Hall of Fame for an exhibit piece. Those were just all early, superficial, exploratory conversations. And then we approached the company to say, listen, the Roy Acuff house where Roy used to live currently is used as an exhibit piece where they do rotating photo exhibits and, various artifacts from our archives team. But what if WSM became the exhibit? What if we opened up the doors and allowed people to come in and experience a radio station and experience a radio show? And it was a winner. It was the moment.
That is a brilliant idea. You didn't want to move back to the transmitter site, is what you're saying?
Yeah, right. So what's fascinating about this new home is it truly was Roy Acuff's home for the last 10 years. I mentioned E.W. Bud Wendell a little earlier, who was overseeing the business operations of the station for 40 or so years. Well, Roy Acuff, the king of country music, who was the cornerstone of the Grand Ole Opry, approached Bud Wendell and said, this is in the mid 80s or so, and said, I would love to just buy a little piece of land from the company over here by Opryland so I can build a house and be at least close to the Opryland theme park. Mr. Wendell said, don't even worry about it. Built him a house, and it sat right outside the Grand Ole Opry house as part of the theme park. And it survived the flood, numerous floods, I should say. And it was an opportunity for us in 2024 to explore that space and visually think out how we could build a radio station in there. And we did. We moved in July of 2024, and we're rolling up to, just over 2 years. And the spot that we have our broadcast studio is where Roy Acuff would have had his living room. So we truly dub our radio station as country music's living room.
I love it. That is so cool. What a great story. In so many ways, you're certainly a general manager and a on-air talent and traffic and continuity and all these other roles that you've done, which is so impressive. But I might think the single most important thing is you are a custodian for such important history. And the fact that you are keeping this franchise going 100 years later, that it's as popular as it's ever been, that people are touring it and coming through and able to experience it through obviously the show, but to go as part of the tour and to Ray Acuff's house and be in the living room and see that. I don't think there's any other experience quite like that. In terms of a radio station. I've gotten to visit Dave Ramsey's facility, which is pretty cool, which is not too far from you, and listeners can go there, but that's obviously, a different animal. But it's wild. I absolutely love it. And I think it's a testament to certainly the incredible team that you have and Bill Cody and everything that you're doing and everything I just mentioned, but also the impact of what radio can do. And radio built the Grand Ole Opry. It built, a theme park, a resort, all these things on the back of WSM in many ways. And that's awesome.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, to be in a place where leadership is so important to continue, like I mentioned earlier, we make history and we preserve history. It's to recognize that this radio station is and will always be important. And we have that. We have that in our leadership. They believe in this radio station. They recognize that, and this is what I've explained to our team. It's that the Grand Ole Opry is a show. It's a living, breathing show that relies on the artists to help tell the story. It doesn't have a voice. We have the voice for the Grand Ole Opry. We're the ones that are the storytellers. We're asking a lot of the artists to come back every time, and they give a lot. What we can give back to them is to properly tell their story and ours.
I love that. Very well said. I got a couple bonus questions for you if you got a couple more minutes. You got a lot on your plate. Do you have a show tonight, by the way?
No, luckily, we do have a great team. We try to be as live and local as we can, but we have a wonderful team. Erin Cooper is on air with Erin, Afternoon Drive. She's on here in a bit. And then we go all the way to 11:30, so nearly midnight, with David Reed for WSM at night, carrying on the tradition of day parting our music. Of course, we had pop music, so centrally focused early in the years of WSM. It didn't truly go full-time country until about the mid-'80s, where Saturday nights were really dedicated to country music and pop music in throughout. We recently had Pat Sajak come revisit the studio. He was a personality in the 70s.
Oh, wow.
And at the time, it was a pop format, so a lot of what he did was focused around pop music. But over time, the radio station, while had a central core of country music, it was very, very day-parted. And we like to stick to that tradition because it's an open door for all things country. So while we may lean a little more mainstream during the day and sprinkle in, of course, some of the classics and the recurrents and the golds, we era-base certain songs. When we get into that nighttime feature, we really harken back to the classics. So WSM at night is the cornerstone for classics. Now ready for bonus questions.
Where do you see things? And let me give you a little bit of context. I think that what you're doing, WSM, and all of these, we just mentioned the resort and the theme park, and obviously the Grand Ole Opry, and you've done such a phenomenal job in the company of putting together this amazing ecosystem. In a lot of ways, similar to like a Disney, for instance. It means there's multiple facets to this whole experience, going through and taking a tour. Where do you see things going in the future for the industry and for WSM as we're more and more into the digital age. I just read the other day, I think there's almost 75% of every advertising dollar now is going towards digital, which certainly is, from a radio business is frightening as we try to get through that. How are you guys positioning for that and preparing for the future?
Certainly embracing it. While we know that we are radio forward, terrestrial radio is our heart and soul. What we can do is identify the ways in which the trending topics of how media is consumed and adapt. Take what we do on a daily basis and turn that into some sort of way for you to consume that in a DSP or a social media. Identifying that what we do every single day can be something that people can re-listen to. So our morning show is a great example, Coffee, Country, and Cody. While everybody's in studio for 4 hours a day, it's very difficult from a licensing perspective to take that entire show to just pull out and post online for people to listen to 4 hours straight. A lot of music that you would have to license, and we have a phenomenal oversight committee and a licensing department that makes sure that we all stay compliant so that the artists stay happy and feel like they're being supported and we're not trying to take advantage of their music and their work. So anything that we post online is with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that we pay for it. So it's impossible for us to properly budget for taking a multi-hour radio show and just posting it online and properly licensing all that music. But what we end up doing out of that 4 hours is editing it down to about a 30 to 45, sometimes 50-minute podcast version of the show. This starts with an introduction. You get the core of why they're there that day. You get to experience what happened the night before. We're talking 235 shows at the Grand Ole Opry. A few of those people in that room are going to have an experiential moment, and they reflect and talk about what was great about that experience. In the middle, you have an artist that comes into the studio. I would say we have in the ballpark of 6 to 7 different artists that come by in a regular week that join the morning show. Then we take that experience that happened live, edit it in post-production, and then post it online to social media, share with those artists, and then go in and cut those different features up into short form moments and deliver to social media. So while radio, and you've captured it on video in that same moment, is your driver, it's why you're there every day. It's your bread and butter, and that's never going to change. What we get to do differently is broadcast on a radio tower live and do the exact same thing these influencers are doing out on social media, and taking their podcast or taking whatever they do and chop up into small features and post out on socials to promote the long form that exists elsewhere, that then promote the big thing that happens every day, is to find moments to promote yourself, to find moments to promote you. And those little slivers of moments that you post to socials, that's the paprika on top. That's a little bit of the salt and pepper while you're trying to get them to the full pie.
When you obviously have a phenomenal on-air staff and legends, and they're already tasked with doing so much, is it challenging to put out this additional content? While some of it is certainly repurposed, there's some content you mentioned earlier they've got to do, and someone's got to host the show. And so now here, 4 or 5 nights a week, someone's out at the show doing that, and then getting back, leaving there at 9 or 10, and then coming back, and probably showing up at 5 or 5:30, whatever it is. How do you scale that? And is it just something that the talent are just kind of added to their list, or do you have production people that help them? How is that actually done?
We do have production people, and there's a lot of stop, start, continue. Exploratory things that we test out. We'll do a pilot. Maybe we'll do an episode or 2 here. And if we recognize that this one isn't going to work, we make sure to stop. We start new projects. We try to be visionaries about what's happening. We continue the projects that we see working and that we see benefit and value. But the most important thing is to find those KPIs. Are you making an impact?
Fail quickly.
Yes, exactly. Fail quickly and move on.
You got into this business really as a young kid. You've done so many different aspects of it. And I think you feel the same way as so many of us in the industry do. We feel it's so important to get young people involved and find the next, Eric, the next Chachi. What would be your advice for young people that are, coming up in school right now, that are interested in radio and are wondering about their future, and in terms of where the industry is going and, things as they're moving more and more digital?
I would say just observe, understand your strengths, your interests, and certainly chase that. If you recognize an opportunity, but it's not something you're passionate about, you'll move on so quickly and it will be lost time. While you gained experience, it wasn't really where you were heading. For me, the success was never say no. Always show up and never say no. I wouldn't say that's the right answer for some people because they find themselves getting taken advantage of. So you have to do that stop, start, continue for yourself constantly. For me, it was ladder hopping here in the corporate ladder. I don't know that I held the same job title in the 16 years that I've been there. I don't think I've held the same job title for 4 years straight, 3 or 4 years straight. It was a continuous move. It was, on-air assistant to marketing and promotions to traffic and continuity coordinator to assistant program director to on-air personality to producer to general manager, all in 16 years. So it's evolving. And that's based on finding the needs and wants of what's in front of you. The opportunity that's presented itself, have you identified the needs and wants and adapted to that?
One last question for you. Tell me a story about a listener coming to tour the radio station or to go to the Grand Ole Opry that you just found so moving and made you verified like why it is that you do this for a living.
So just the other day, we had WSM night at the Opry. We welcomed our winners who won tickets on the radio, and we invited them into the studio first to do a quick tour. They get not just the nickel tour, they get the quarter tour. We take them all the way through the house and all the way into the broadcast studio, and they get to see a Opry warm-up show break happen live in country music's living room. And when we asked, anybody out there feel comfortable on hopping on the radio to talk about who you are, where you're from, what you listen to, your favorite radio show, what's a favorite moment of listening to WSM, a few hands went up. And, our DJ at the time selected a hand, but I noticed in the back corner that he didn't recognize was a 9-year-old boy. And I made sure to walk him up to that microphone and pointed him out. And Zach got him on the air. And I know that made an impact.
That is so cool, man. Eric, you are truly just a remarkable leader. I've loved learning all about the Grand Ole Opry and WSM. You are a custodian. You are also a historian in so many ways, man. And thank you for the education. Thank you for everything that WSM does for country music and for listeners and that 9-year-old boy, and appreciate the time. It's truly been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me on here, man. This has been really enjoyable.
This is actually the first time I've done this before. We recorded with Eric. Sadly, very sadly, after we recorded with Eric, Bill Cody passed away. I want to start off by what the LA Times wrote about Bill. Bill Cody, the Grand Ole Opry and longtime WSM radio host who woke up listeners with his velvet voice in country music lore, has died. He was 67. The Tennessee radio station confirmed Cody's death on social media on Tuesday, writing, "It is with heavy hearts that we share the passing of our dear friend and beloved WSM voice, Bill Cody. A singular presence on WSM Nashville for more than 3 decades, Bill welcomed listeners each morning on Coffee, Country, and Cody with a broad smile, conversational ease, and an unerring ability to make both artists and audiences feel at home. He joined WSM in 1994 and had Charlie Daniels as his first in-studio guest. He built more than a morning show. He created a gathering place rooted in his deep love for country music and the people behind it." I obviously heartbroken. I personally did not know Bill, but knew so much about him and heard so much about him. Eric, you obviously worked with him for many years. And what I'd like to just ask you is just some meaningful moments that you can share with us and some personal stories about Bill. And I'd like to just kind of kick off the first one with, what was your first reaction when you heard the news?
Well, interestingly enough, when we did our first podcast taping, Bill had been hospitalized for a little while, and it wasn't the first time. He's had some issues in the past, particularly around 2020, in a pre-existing condition that he's lived with since the 90s. But he always lived with this level of optimism and resilience, all the way up until the last time that I was able to talk to him in person, went to go visit him in the hospital. And he said, you know what? I'll probably be back on Monday. I feel feeling pretty good, feeling better. I just need to get back on my feet. And we all lived with that same level of optimism. So it really was a shock whenever we got the call that he had made a turn for the worse. And, it was a moment as we come together here at WSM and the Opry as like a family, that we reached out to his wife, Rebecca, and asked if there was an opportunity for those of us to come see him for the last time. And she said, absolutely. And we did. I mean, we dropped everything that we had going on for that day, went straight to the hospital and got to spend some final moments with Bill, alongside his wife, Rebecca, his daughter, Hannah, and son, Luke. And it was powerful. And that's what we did. We shared stories and memories with him still there with us, what he's meant to us, both in our personal and professional lives, and came together as a group. And interestingly enough, we work for a great company that offers up opportunities for us to speak with, some sort of, therapist or some sort of outreach for us to sort of open up our own hearts without feeling like we have a closed door. And I said, well, I'll be honest with you. You're talking about broadcasters here. It's what we do is talk, and we talk to each other. And that's what we did the day after his passing and the day of his funeral service and memorial at the Grand Ole Opry House, is we came together like we do, and we shared stories, memories, laughs, tears, live on the radio. Shared that with our listeners, connected with the listeners, had an open door to the radio station to where those who were his first producers on the day that he got to Nashville in 1994 were there. There was a notable moment in time where he references a lady named Nancy Stewart had picked up the phone that he had befriended for many years and said, hey, your dream job just opened up in Nashville. And he picked up the phone and called Kyle Cantrell to start to make that pilgrimage to Nashville. And they were both there. We had Nancy and Kyle in the studio together to talk about that moment. So to know that WSM is a safe haven for people like in the broadcast community, knowing that as not just a steward, but a tastemaker of country music, broadcasting legacy that Bill Cody carried in that tradition, that we were able to all come together and really reflect on his importance to not just WSM, country music, broadcasting, the Opry, all of it.
For people who never had the chance to meet Bill, such as myself, I do believe I got to see him speak at CRS, but never got to meet him in person. Who was he away from the microphone, and what made him so special?
What's interesting is at his funeral service, his pastor got up to speak, and he said, a lot of you know this man as Bill Cody. I knew him as his Christian name, Trent Klutz. He said, you got to know Superman. I got to know Clark Kent. And what's great is that on the times when you really got to connect with him, you would recognize that if you go up to Cross Plains on a day that we had set aside on, coincidentally, what ended up being some of the hottest mornings on Nashville record, but in Cross Plains, Tennessee, to do what we do is live radio remotes. People who are driving through Cross Plains know him as Trent. So they would holler up at the broadcast table and say, Trent, love you, Trent. And then he, no different than somebody like Minnie Pearl, would create characters out of these folks up on the plains in Cross Plains, Tennessee. And what he did was take the theory of live a life and talk about it and brought that to the airwaves and created characters out of his people in a positive way. For somebody like me who came to Nashville at 22 years old, trying to find my path, trying to pave it, you start with mowing the grass, and you lay down a little gravel, then you pave the road. You just try to figure out what your sense of direction is. He's one of those people that championed anybody early in their career. There was never a sense of, this guy's untouchable. I can't really get 5 minutes of his time to learn or get into his brain. He was there for you, and he was your biggest champion, your biggest cheerleader. And if you came to him and said, hey, I need your help, he would be there. And for myself, coming in and, say, filling in for Charlie Matos on the morning and being sort of the production assistant over the years to the traffic and continuity manager, he saw my path as we went. And then in the 2020 to 2023 range, became one of the lead producers of the Coffee, Country, and Cody morning show. He and I got to build a lot of trust. Not that we didn't have it already, but that's where you really get in the weeds with somebody, is when you work on a show together. And then he can get that sense of building out that trust. So when this general manager role came up, and I approached him in applying for it and asked if he would be a recommendation, he said, absolutely. And it was never a sense of, How do you manage Bill Cody? How do you be his manager and leader? It was built on trust. And he knew that. I was not his boss. He and I were side by side figuring out how to do the job. And he opened that door of trust and allowed it. And it's something that I'll carry with me forever. On a personal scale, I lost my father when I was 21 and met Bill Cody when I was 22. I can tell you right now, I would not be the same person without Bill being in my life.
Can you recall the first time meeting Bill?
Yeah. So the flood had just happened in Nashville. So this is about summer 2010. And, I was fresh off the boat, if you will, coming into Nashville, not knowing really the significance of WSM and the radio tower. But I got a master class of education pretty quickly. And my first day of WSM would have been at the Tower and Transmitter building, starting to train for what would have been a fill-in for Charlie on days that he was out. And eventually they would be broadcasting from the hotel studio based on remote. So they would be basically there with I think it was either Marty's system or however we were doing it with just microphones. And I would be managing the automation system and all of our components back at the tower. But I walked into the room and he looked at me and I didn't have to go introduce myself first. He just recognized and knew that there was somebody coming in who may have been important to the future health of the show. And he goes, "Hi, I'm Bill Cody. Welcome to WSM Radio."
I love that.
And we were in Jack DeWitt's office. So this is, a 1932 historic tower and transmitter building listed on the National Registry of Historic Places. In the summertime, you open up that refrigerator and put your head in there just to get a little cooler. And in the wintertime, you open up that oven after you turned it on to get a little warmer. But it was, you're talking about, a place that was built for function, not comfort. But man, we made it our own out there. So it would have been in 2010 at the Tower and Transmitter building. And he was just such a comfort to meet. And you knew immediately that you were meeting somebody important. And he didn't make it feel that way. But you knew that person was going to be somebody that you needed to be around.
It's a great transition in my next question. He interviewed just about every major artist in country music, but he never seemed interested in making the story about himself. It was always about the artist. He was so good at putting the listener forward. And I love the story that you were just, sharing earlier with his original friends and how Trent, you said was his real name, correct? And
yes,
that's what everybody called him. What was it about Bill that earned so much respect from artists and executives alike and his listeners?
I think you're right in saying that he had an interview style that made the artists or the executives feel comfortable. It wasn't an interview, it was a conversation. And another thing that he taught me, which is so incredibly important, is it's different when you're having a one-on-one conversation with somebody than if you're on the air having a conversation, because your goal isn't to make your listener feel like there's two untouchable people having a conversation. Your goal is to make that artist and that listener feel like they're closer. So what you want to do is sort of remove yourself and make it feel like the listener is gaining something from this artist out of this conversation, and that the artist is able to, without knowing, make it seem as if they're more relatable from the listener perspective. So you're the conduit of taking these two hands and putting them together and start holding it away. He was a master at that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I've honestly never, all the people I've interviewed and been in this business for 30 plus years, I've never heard that before, but such a great way of explaining it. And he obviously was phenomenal at it. What a great piece of advice that, young people and even old people such as myself can take with us and learn to be better interviewers. He spent decades at WSM and obviously became one of the most recognizable voices in country. What do you think his greatest contribution to the format was?
I would say, with WSM, you recognize that you're a steward of time, right? There's those that came before you that create an imprint into country music that eventually imprints on you based on who you're around. For Bill, if you think about it, 32 years of his career was spent here at WSM and another 20 to 25 years spent outside of this Nashville market. So he had relationships that he brought in to Nashville, whether it was George Strait, Dwight Yoakam, those who were either in Texas or in California, and made them feel comfortable in Nashville. Although Dwight and George Strait, as two examples, don't necessarily play the Opry all that often, if ever just a few times early in their career, they still call in. They still connect with Nashville. And that's important, is that you make sure that Music City doesn't keep out, it brings in. Anytime that he stood on the stage of the Opry, if it was a debut artist or the biggest A-list name in country music, he made sure that they felt comfortable in knowing that this person was entrusting to introduce them the right way and get them onto the stage the right way, get them off the stage the right way, and to create a comfort level so that that artist comes back. If that artist doesn't have a great experience and they feel like they blew it, and they look over to the side of the stage, and again, the first person that says their name, so the last person they see walk out, and the first person they see as they end is your host. If they don't feel comfortable, they're not going to come back. If you give them that level of comfort, so when they walk out, they immediately see you, they feel comfortable, you let them settle in, you have a couple of words of encouragement before they go out, and then they see you and you come back and you make them feel like they're the biggest thing on the top of the mountain. That's the magic.
This is a master class, man. I am enjoying just, living vicariously through you, and certainly the memories that you have of Bill, but just all of this tremendous advice that Bill shared with you and now you're sharing with everybody else. How do you think Bill should be remembered by the radio community?
I would say a leader, a coach, a mentor, and a friend of everybody who has been either on the music business side, the professional side, the industry side, the artist side. He is, one of those larger than life characters that had a vision, whether it was Coffee Country and Cody, whether it was the Essential Bill Cody collection, where we take what he does throughout the week and repackage that on the weekend so it replays, or a syndicated show, Pure American Country, or hosting the Music City Walk of Fame induction ceremonies, or the Country Music Hall of Fame medallion ceremony red carpets. He never said no. He always made space for opportunities that allowed amplification of other people's work, and never wanted to be the person in the star spotlight. Always wanted to make sure that if he had a voice and had that star, he helped elevate yours. So I would just say that, country music's best friend.
My last question, and Eric, again, thank you so much for taking this time to share these amazing stories and everything that you learned from Bill. If Bill were listening to this conversation right now, what would you want to say to him?
If I could just get a few more minutes to sit with him and talk, the most important thing is thank you. Thank you, and I wish he could have seen the level of outreach from the industry after he passed. I mean, when people are living in it, goodness, I think back to that a new Tanya Tucker song that says, bring me my flowers while I'm living, so you can recognize that people are there for you. The level of outreach and support, I think he would have felt overwhelmed. His family certainly was, and we certainly were here at the radio station, but my goodness, the amount of people who he impacted, whether it was somebody coming in as an intern to somebody that he spent 20 or 30 years on the microphone with, or has been there for him his entire career, his level of impact, I certainly hope it was felt. And one of the great conversation pieces that we took away from remembering in the memorial service and in the conversations that we had in the radio station prior to his funeral at the Grand Ole Opry House is that if there's any radio station frequency that can reach heaven, it's 6:50 a.m. And we hope that he was able to hear us.
Eric, getting to know you has been just a pure honor, and you are wise beyond your years. We just were introduced 6 months ago at CRS through our mutual friend Tom English, and I truly enjoyed interviewing you, and I'm so grateful for you taking the time to share all your memories about Bill and recording this addendum to the podcast. I can't wait to spend more time and get to know you even more. It is evident you are just a tremendous soul and someone that is so incredibly passionate about this industry. And again, thank you for everything you do. It WSM, everything that you've done for the industry so far. And you've got so many more years to help lead us and lead the phenomenal station that you and your team run. Our heart goes out to you, to certainly Bill's family, and your whole entire WSM and Grand Ole Opry family as well. Thanks again, my friend.
Well, I appreciate you giving me your platform to talk. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for listening to Chachi Loves Everybody. If you like the show, we hope you'll leave us a 5-star rating and tell your friends. Make sure to follow on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This has been a Benztown McVeigh podcast production. Hosted and researched by Dave Chachi Dennis. Engineered by Darren Silva. Produced and edited by Jake Urbanik. Show coordinator Suzanne Aksu and Robbie Gessel.